Hi, friends. This episode of Big Blue Banter is brought to you by Prize Picks. Head on over to Prize Picks and use promo code BANTER, and they'll match up to $100 on a new deposit. Thank you and enjoy.
Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneier. Joined as always, my co-host Nick Filato. Today we're here to talk about part 2 of our little mini offseason series on the 5 biggest burning questions facing the Giants as they head into this pivotal 2024 offseason. And that question today, Nick, is going to be this. What kind of impact does an alpha wide receiver one make on the current Giants roster, the current quarterback situation, and the future quarterback situation projected in? And how does that impact the potential of the Giants taking a wide receiver one or someone they deem to potentially be an alpha wide receiver one at 6th overall? So, Nick, I want to first start by getting your opinion, and then I'll go into mine, of what you believe and deem to be a true alpha wide receiver one. Because there are wide receivers we love from year to year. Tank Dell, for example, we loved him. We said we don't understand why he would be a 3rd round pick because he wins at all 3 levels, but he still is 5'8". And quite frankly, Nick, Tank Dell is not tilting coverages yet his way. Maybe that will change. I mean, Tyreek Hill does it. So the size isn't everything in that regard. But in your mind, in your estimation, what makes a true alpha wide receiver one?
I think a true alpha wide receiver one is a player that dictates defensive coverage. Now, we see those players all around the league, right? The Giants used to have one in Odell Beckham Jr. That was an alpha. I think alpha is the best term to use here. I think Mike Evans constitutes a true number one. Obviously, Jamar Chase and some of the more higher profile ones. Where it gets really tricky for me is the Amon-Ra St. Browns of the world, because they're of a different mold and they operate in the slot. Now, does not mean that they're not alpha number one wide receivers. It just means they don't operate on the outside, because you look at defenses around the NFL, they change their coverage based on Amon-Ra St. Brown. They change their coverage based on Cooper Kupp. So I think that would be the defining factor for me. And I know there are a lot of variables that kind of go into that. Obviously, if you have more than one options, maybe it won't dictate coverage as much. But if you were to just place them on an average team, would they really force defensive coordinators' hands to remove that player from the game and have the offense defeat you with another option?
Yeah, Nick, you nailed it. And I think that's going to be a main theme. And we're going to get into, by the way, a lot of those situations. We're going to go team by team, like the Lions and like some of these other teams, and go over how they acquired what they deem to be their wide receiver one, if he's a true alpha wide receiver one, and then what kind of impact that's had on winning and losing, having a player like that on the roster. Because I think, that's where the connect or disconnect may happen among fans. And that's what we need to figure out, too, as we're entering this stage of the rebuild. Like, what value does that bring? Versus, of course, another thing we're going to discuss on this pod, Nick, which is, and we're not going to get too much into the prospects individually, but we're going to get into ideas of like looking at Daniel Jeremiah's recent top 50 big board, because he's someone we trust and we like to reference before we get into the tape, where he views the talent. For example, like if there are a good amount of receivers picking, ranked in the top range where the Giants are picking in round 2, either of those picks, does that impact the idea of getting it in the round 1? And can you find alpha wide receiver ones even in that range? But to circle back, Nick, to the main question here, which is what is an alpha wide receiver one to me? It's exactly what it is to you. It's the schematic side of things. Does that receiver, are you able to use that wide receiver in a way where coverage is going to change and you're going to open up different space and areas of the field for hopefully your quarterback to recognize and get the ball out to and throw that into that space to change your game, to give you explosive plays? Because I can sit here and say it's somebody who gives you 1 explosive play a game or 2 explosive plays a game that do flip games. And that is true in the case of a Tyreek Hill or something like that. Or I could say it's someone like a Fitzgerald who you can throw the ball up to even when he's covered and he'll just win in those contested catch situations. We're going to talk about a receiver like that today, by the way, when we're discussing some of these prospects coming in. And that is true. But in the end, like, that gives you something. But in the end, to me, it's just from a schematic standpoint, can that guy shift the coverages? And I also throw into the mix, Nick, can that guy play inside out? Can he play in the slot? And because the reason I say that is because you can find matchups in the slot that almost, in my opinion, from an offensive standpoint, dictate the coverage to the defense. For example, some of the stuff you say Amon-Ra St. Brown does, and a lot of the stuff CeeDee Lamb does in that Mike McCarthy system, that's all designed to just get a one-on-one for Lamb as much as possible. Because then you have the ability to win those one-on-ones consistently. It's at that point for me, it's not just do you dictate coverage when you're on the outside? Because I do believe it's very important. You have to be a true alpha wide receiver one. You have to be able to dictate coverage on the outside. You have to have rolled coverages. Like, think about the Giants' game plan versus Justin Jefferson in the second Vikings game, the playoff game. That's what a true alpha wide receiver one does for me. He has that kind of game plan, presented by a DC. But it's also, do you have that ability to win those one-on-ones when your coach is smart enough to scheme up those one-on-ones? Ben Johnson, for example, for the Lions, does a great job with that with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think McCarthy does a good job of that with CeeDee Lamb as well. And there's other receivers who are in that mix as well. Beckham, that was the best example of all. When the Giants had Odell Beckham in his heyday, 2014, 2015, Ben McAdoo, running a very similar system to Mike McCarthy, put him in the slot a lot to get those one-on-ones and to get the specific type of matchups that, in my opinion, dictate to the coverage. So that's where I'm at with that, Nick. The next part of this question goes, is that because the Giants pick at number 6 overall in this draft class? Obviously, I think if you look to free agency, Nick, it's very unlikely the Giants are going to find a true alpha wide receiver one based on a multitude of things. One, will a true alpha wide receiver one ever hit free agency? Two, will it be at an age that you want to invest in? Because some might make the case that, Nook, DeAndre Hopkins is still an alpha. I don't know if I would say that, but some might, Nick, based on the second criteria I said, like, can you throw it up to him and he can make a play on the ball? But it's not like the Giants are going to
Is it
spend there.
Nuke? I thought it was
Nuke.
Nuke.
No, it's definitely not Nuke.
Really? I always said Nuke.
It's either I think it's the Nuck that I said was probably
Nuke
the
Hopkins.
I think it's Nook.
Huh. I don't know.
Like, not like a Nuck, like a Nook. It's definitely not Nuke.
Nuke Hopkins. I always said that. I always felt like I've heard
Nuke.
Scott Hansen say that too, and I trust Scott Hansen.
I definitely trust Scott Hansen over either of us, and someone can reply and let us know, but I'm pretty sure it's definitely not Nuke. I'm going with definitely not Nuke. And given your track record when it comes to pronunciating names and just getting things dead wrong from that standpoint, usually on your Devontaes and your Devontas, remember that video I found for you with Devontae Freeman saying my name is Devontae Freeman. He can't be wrong about his own name. I mean, well, Tyrod was. So, but Tyrod was. But
yeah, Tyrod, yeah.
Tyrod.
Yeah, I'll say this before we go on with the next point, though. I think we have to acknowledge the traits that a true alpha number one wide receiver would have and would possess. And there are a lot of traits, because you can go from the traits at the catch point, you can go from body control, you can go from route running, but it all starts at the line of scrimmage as well. Do you have an expansive release package? Because I need this alpha wide receiver to be able to line up on the line of scrimmage and not just off the line of scrimmage. So if you line up on the line of scrimmage, how many release packages do you have against an above average to good press type of cornerback? And how do you use your hands off of that? Can you stack? How quick do you get off the line of scrimmage and get into that second phase of your stem? Can you disguise your intentions up your stem? If we're talking about the catch point, do you high point the football? Do you show your intentions as a wide receiver too early, giving the defensive back kind of a tip that you're going for the football? And all of that kind of goes into mental processing and savvy and experience. But if you look around the league, players like Devontae Adams do such a good job with the little nuances of playing the receiver position. And that's why he's one of the true alpha wide receivers. But there are a lot of other traits that I didn't even touch on there, but there's a lot that goes into it. And that's one of the reasons why I love evaluating wide receivers. And even some of the guys who are down at the Senior Bowl right now, see like Lad McConkey run a route, the kid from Georgia. It's just like you watch him and how he is able to create extra separation without pushing off at the top of his breaks, like little nuances like that. Hunter Renfrow does stuff like that all the time. Those can go a long way. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, bud?
I think you outlined all of them, except for two that I would add that I know you obviously agree with, which is just that vertical speed element that some guys have, like a Tyreek Hill, Deshaun Jackson, and then that post-catch ability that some guys have. One guy that comes to mind in this class for me is Malik Neighbors, who we're going to talk about a little bit today. When it comes down to it, though, for me, when you're talking about an alpha wide receiver one, a true alpha wide receiver one, you're talking about someone who strings together a bunch of those traits on tape. That's the thing. The release package is incredibly important. And I feel like it's almost at this point like a foundation. If you look at these best receivers in the NFL, Jamar Chase and Devontae Adams, and even you go down the list of guys who are maybe a tier lower, but still great, like a DJ Moore, watch them off the line of scrimmage. They're creating separation with their release packages. And I love how you talk about their intentions. They play smart. They think about everything they do, but also there's a natural ability to it too. Someone like Antonio Brown, for example, I always felt like his ability to get in and out of his breaks and just have that, I guess, lower half flexion. It's just uncanny and it's just natural. And that's when I see Neighbors, that's kind of what I see a little bit of, not totally an Antonio Brown type, but somebody who can just get in, dip low, make that play, and then explode out and lose no ground. Something even that, on tape, we talked about this during the season, but Jalen Hyatt has shown that to me on tape, that ability to sink the hips and then just explode out of that while losing no ground. But To me, it's the guys who can string together all of those traits. But I like that you brought up kind of that release package and, your intentions as a wide receiver, because, that's a huge factor to me in all of the ones who end up working out. Because a lot of these guys can string together into natural traits, in my opinion. But then to get to that next level of production, it requires that mental side as well.
You got to think when it comes to releasing off the line of scrimmage. I'm glad you brought this up. How many seconds do you have in a play? Everything is so
So
quick.
fast.
If
Yeah.
you can't defeat press, you're not going to be aligning on the line of scrimmage, right? If you can't get off of press, like that is such an
And if you're
important
not if you can't do that, you're not a wide receiver one, true alpha wide receiver one already, right? Like
you
done.
can have all of the speed and all of the athletic ability in the world, but you have to understand the angles and the timing and
Yep.
also have just an awareness of how to play the cat and mouse game throughout an entire football game when you're lined up against Sauce Gardner or when
True.
you're lined up against a Patrick Surtain. You need to know, like, hey, I'm going to show him this, I'm going to show him this, but then on this route, I need to open his hips this way. So I'm going to release, I'm going to lean in on my stem, and then I'm going to break to the inside because I showed him that earlier in the game and I did something different. He's going to anticipate that because we're all freaking human, right?
Exactly. And so we'll talk about a bunch more of that. So just to get back in the discussion a little bit and just get into some of the points we previewed, I'll say this. If I'm a Giants fan right now, I'd rule out the idea of finding a true alpha one in free agency. Not only is one unlikely to hit the true open market, but at that point, the age becomes a factor, and the idea of where the Giants are at as a franchise becomes a factor. Do you really want to spend 20? If there was a true alpha that the market, like the closest thing might be like Calvin Ridley, who I don't think is an alpha one wide receiver, at least anymore. He could prove me wrong next year and get back to his old level of play, where I feel like he was one that tilted coverage, but last year was not. I didn't like the tape I saw Calvin Ridley, especially toward the middle and end of the season, where I feel like he was kind of just winded and stuff. And that may just be, look, he is getting back in the swing of the NFL. But even so, if you're going to find a guy like that, Nick, guess what? You're allocating 20 plus million in cap space a year, more probably, to this player. That is a risky venture in its own self of where the Giants are at from a franchise roster build standpoint and cap standpoint. So I think really when you look forward, Nick, if the Giants are going to get outside wide receiver one, which is very possible in my opinion this offseason, it's via the draft. And why is it so possible via the draft? Well, let's just take a look at this because
I want to bring up
yeah, go ahead.
one more thing
Sure.
about the lack of true alpha wide receivers on free agency. And one reason why you see that is because there has been a market that's set now where true wide receivers are traded if they're not going to be retained by their team. And this is something we have seen so much recently. We saw it with Tyreek Hill. We saw it with Devontae Adams. We saw it with Amari Cooper for like a 5th round pick. Like, I don't think Amari Cooper is a true alpha, like bona fide number one, but he is a number one wide receiver. And the Cowboys were just trying to get rid of their contract. And I think the Browns were happy that they received him and all that money. But that is now the kind of modus operandi of a lot of NFL teams. We saw the Bills, which I'm sure we'll talk about maybe a little bit later. We saw the Bills do this with Stephon Diggs. And what happened with the Bills offense from 2019 to 2020 when that happened? They were like averaging 19 points a game in 2019. And then in 2020, they were averaging, I think, 31 and jumped to second in the NFL. It's a huge jump. Now, it also coincided with the development of their young quarterback, Josh Allen. So that context is important. But my point is, if you're going to get a wide receiver, an alpha, number one wide receiver who is still in his prime and is young, you're likely going to need to get him through the trade if you don't draft him.
Well, that brings me to then before we get into the next part, then the draft, let's go to that part then and talk through and sift through that part, Nick. Like, are the Giants in a position where you would want them to make a trade right now for an alpha wide receiver one? Say, he's a little older, Stephon Diggs. I know he's having some problems in Buffalo, but there may be other options that fit the mold and fit the billing that are looking for a big contract that their current team can't afford to give them or don't want to give them. Are the Giants right now in a position? Because I'll tell you why when we get to the draft part of this. I view it in completely different buckets for me. While I'm very willing to try to get an alpha wide receiver one with the current draft pick the Giants have, I'm almost completely out on trading. No, Matt, because when you make the trade, you're giving up a first round pick minimum, probably more, and a shit ton of cap space for a team that isn't, in my opinion, in a position to compete for a Super Bowl right now at all. So to me, it's very different. To you, is it different? Because and then the other, the what's it called? The devil's advocate that would be so hard to get these guys, these true alphas, that if you have a chance to get one via trade, whatnot, you take it. Because if you're the Eagles right now, for example, and let's say they didn't have Jalen Hurts, or Jalen Hurts hadn't made a jump, they would have been still probably happy having traded that first round pick for AJ Brown, because that first round pick ended up being, I believe, Treylon Burks. But no matter who it was at that point, the Eagles weren't going to get a player like AJ Brown. Forget the cap space aspect. Is the devil's advocate side.
I think the devil's advocate side actually has a lot of merit, but it doesn't take into account that who the hell is the AJ Brown right now? I don't think there's
Of the trade, right? Of the veterans.
I don't think there's an
right.
AJ Brown around. I think the closest thing would be T. Higgins. And I
Yes, that
don't
would be
think
the
T.
closest thing.
Higgins,
I don't think T. Higgins is at all AJ Brown.
that's my point. So no,
Right.
that's why I am
Fair.
on the same exact ship as you, Dan. Same exact.
Because even if you're thinking like some recent ones outside of the AJ Brown one, which was a great move by the Eagles because of how young he was and still so much in his prime, the others are like Tyreek Hill, who's already said he's got maybe 1 or 2 years left and he's going to retire. Devontae Adams, who at the time was turning 30. So we're not talking about this. Like, if that's the level of wide receiver the Giants can trade a first round pick and then some for, while giving a new contract where he makes $25 million against the cap. To me, the only way I would do that is if I had a quarterback I believed in right now, or a young quarterback that really can take that next jump. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, these draft assets are way too valuable.
Right.
You just need Joe
Especially when
Schoen
you're
to nail.
probably rebuilding. Like, in all actuality, if you really look
Yes.
at this team and break it down, I know it's tough to admit, it's tough to get to this point, and it's going to be tough for Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll to get to this point this offseason too, Nick. So I'm curious if they will even get to this point, because they're coaching kind of and GMing kind of for their lives. And that, when you're doing that, it kind of is hard to push ahead the future for the now, when it's very meaningful to now. But if you're really looking at this team, and I know they went all in last offseason, try to build around the core, but now you had last season, your one option is to blame it all on the injuries. Your other option is to look back at 2022 and say, was it really all that we chalked it up to be? Or was it a string of maybe some easy schedule, not really beating any good teams besides Baltimore? And, Baltimore at the time, that was a great win, but wasn't really the elite team of that year. No, it wasn't the Chiefs. No, it wasn't the teams in the Super Bowl that year. They didn't beat the Eagles. They didn't compete with the Eagles. And they went, 3-7-1 down the stretch of that season in 2022, right? And that's also, by the way, all under the guise of no one's seen the system yet. No one's seen Jones operate in this. The boot actions are working. The quick game's working. Everything we put on tape is new, and these DCs don't have any film on it. So I think that's the juggling act they have to ask themselves this season. What's more important to them, the injury-plagued 2023 season, or were we overrating 2022 to begin with? And that's a tough question for them, but especially with where they're at in their tenure. Go ahead. Looks like you're going to say something.
Yeah, so I'm going to put you on the spot here, Dan. And you're a poker savant.
Okay.
Big poker guy. Let's say, and I'm not saying that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll are operating with this mindset, but let's say they believe their chips are already in the Daniel Jones bucket and they feel that their leash is kind of short. Give me a poker reference.
Okay.
For how a poker player would play this scenario.
So easy. This is so easy. Well, how the poker player would play it. So what the term is in poker is pot committed. Now, I'll tell you why this is an okay poker reference, because I think one of the biggest flaws in poker players' games are the poker players who just always consider themselves to be pot committed, and the poker players who are doing the math and the odds in their head, and based on the odds, they're deciding, okay, this is a situation where a lot of players think they're pot committed, but I know I'm actually not pot committed, and my best option is to fold and keep the rest of my stack and potentially add on. So it's a situation of being pot committed. You've overplayed your hand, essentially. So let's say you have like ace king and the board is like king queen jack, and the board is king queen jack, and you have king queen 4, and there's a ton of action. You led the flop, you led pre-flop, then you led the flop, and somebody raised you, then you called, then you checked the turn, somebody bet again, you called, and on the river you check, and that player goes all in. No, it's on the turn you check, and that player also goes on. I'll tell you why it's on the turn, Nick. You got to keep the river around, because there is a possibility that on the river, aka Daniel Jones, you can hit and have, I guess, a breakout. Now, we can argue and debate about how many outs, that's another poker term, Nick, the player has the river, but we know they went all in. And you could say, I put in X amount of money. I'm pot committed. There's already this much in there, but you still have that 300 left. And the smart players will do the math in their head, Nick. They'll know the odds. They'll say, I only have 3 cards left in the deck that give me the win. That's a 6% chance going to the river. I don't care that it's only another 250 to me. There's 1,000 in there. When the reality, calling 250 to win 1,000 is 1 in 4 chance, 1 in 4 on your money. And that's not a 6% chance. It doesn't equal to making that decision. So that's the exact situation the Giants are in. There's still that upside, I believe, to them. They have to believe it. Why else did they sign him? That Jones can break out and be a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, or at worst, maybe a top 10 quarterback, elite type of borderline elite type of player. But you're at the point where your outs are very thin. And the chances of it happening are much, much lower than they were on the flop. That's AKA after 2022. On the turn, or pre-flop, I should say, when you drafted him, when you drafted Jones at first, and after his 2019 season that looked promising, and the flop was good. We had a king on the flop with top pair. But then the action started coming. After the flop, it's probably like the 2022 season. There's time passed, but he showed a glimmer of hope. Then on the turn and the river, that's when you make on the turn, I should say, that's when you have to make your big decision. And so that's the situation they face. But you're right, though, in the overall sense, Nick, and I didn't mean to get into all poker, but you did ask for that. But you're right in the overall sense, by the way, that it's a decision that's tougher for them than it is for us. Because, if you decide I'm not going to rip the Band-Aid off and I'm going to push back some of that Jones cap hit, it's 2025, we'll deal with it later, because it might not even be me dealing with it later. It might be a new coach and a new GM dealing with it later. I have a better chance to win right now. And you know what, Nick? I don't know if I can even fault them for that. Like, their jobs are on the line. This is their livelihood. For Joe Schoen, he may never get another GM job. I don't know if Daboll will even get another head coach job now that all this negative press has been out about him. You know what I'm saying?
That of course, I know
Yeah.
what you're saying, and one reason why I wanted to, first off, I wanted to hear you bring in your just amazing understanding of poker and relate it
Yeah.
to the Giant situation, because I do believe it is relevant. Secondly, the ground that Daboll and Shane is on right now is shakier than I think. I don't want to make it dire, right? But I
Yeah.
do think it is a little bit shakier than we expected at the end of this season because of these anonymous reports that were coming out. You see the, I don't want to say insubordination, because we're not exactly sure what happened with Wink Martindale, but kind of insubordination with possibly the Drew Wilkins and the Kevin Wilkins of the world, right?
Sure.
At least we can probably say that, because it seems like they were leaking a lot of that stuff to Jay Glazer. Don't really know that for certain, but it at least appears that way. So if we have another year of instability, is Brian Daboll gone? And what does that say for Joe Schoen at that point? And I think, I know that this is supposed to be a wide receiver podcast, but this organically kind of came about. And I really think this, obviously, it's going to affect their decision making when it comes to
Yes.
their biggest move and their biggest investment, which is Daniel Jones.
Right. And they're big. And, excuse me, it's fine to go down this route for a multitude of reasons, because this is a podcast, a 5-part little mini series about the Giants offseason direction and where they go with it. And the thing is, when you're picking there at 6, your decision might be different if you're trying to decide, this is it. We have to push forward now, because you may want that wide receiver 1 right now then over a quarterback who you believe in, but you have some question marks about. You might not truly believe in him. But the question that I have, Nick, that I think will determine all this, and we might not get information for, is what has been sent down from the top, from John Mara, from Steve Tisch, from the ownership, because we know, based on history, before that 2020, what was it? When did they finally dump that loser? 18, 19, 2021. He got 4 years. Before the 2021 season, Mara said out loud to the public, like, this is it. Dave Gettleman has to win right now. We're giving one more chance, and literally based on the wins and losses will be determined if they keep their job. But if that's still the case, then that changes everything. Then if you're the Giants, you never take a quarterback, in my opinion, year. You have to, if you're Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, you have to take the wide receiver 1, or if you believe the quicker path.
You have to go all in.
Yes, you have to go all in, and you have to restructure the contracts. You take the wide receiver 1, or if you believe, Peyton Turner, the DN, can get you there faster, or the corner can get you there faster, Armstead, or Terrian, what's his name? Arnold, the kid from Bama, who I just started looking at, who I like. If you believe those are the guys that get you quicker, then you take one of those, and you don't take. But to me, it all comes down to that. And I am just praying to God, Nick. I really am. Not God, because that's disingenuous to people who actually do, use prayer and work it in their life. I'm praying to no one. I'm just hoping for all hope, okay, that John Mara has learned some things about the Dave Gettleman era that he put us through, and has decided in his mind that I'm going to tell these dudes, You go about this your way, because that, if they sit him down and they say, let me just tell you, John, I hate to say it, dude, but I'm going to say dude in this, even though they would never talk to him about that. They just hate to say it, sir. But, the 2022 season, when you really break down the tape, it's not all it was chalked up to be. The 2023 season, I know things sucked. The injuries were there. But based on everything we have, man, we just don't have the same faith we used to have in Jones being the guy to win us a Super Bowl, or at least to take us compete for division consistently if he's making 50 mil against the cap, John. And I know we said this would be the case, but we also said to you, we have an out after 2 years. We didn't give him 140 million guaranteed. We didn't give him 130, 125 guaranteed. We gave him half in guarantees, essentially. Then we pushed them back. We tried to win now. And so we probably gave him more like 60 to 65% in guarantees with the restructure they made on September 4th that freed up, 6 million cap space, 8 million more dead down the line, whatever it may be. But we already kind of told you that we need. And sure, you may not believe that 2023 was fair, but at this point, John, we need to have the ability to look forward, and you need to give us that leash. So that's what it's going to come down to me, Nick. Will John Mara give them that leash to kind of rebuild if they feel like the best option for this franchise, for them keeping their jobs long term, is to rebuild now and rip the Band-Aid off rather than keep doubling down on the Jones?
100%. Brought up the 2021 season. I just think we need to take a second to acknowledge what Kadarius Toney did, because it's one of the funniest things ever. When keeping it real goes wrong, as Dave Chappelle would say, you played yourself. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Of the 2021 season?
No, this is from this past weekend, the divisional round, but we were talking about the 2021 season and going all in, and the Giants, they selected wide receiver Kadarius Toney because they needed that alpha wide receiver, someone they thought could be an alpha wide receiver. Right. And now I'm just saying, since you brought that up, it came into my mind, we have to at least touch on Kadarius Toney telling the entire world that he's not hurt. And the Chiefs were just basically being like, we weren't trying to throw you under the bus. Right. We don't want you here because you're a cancer on this freaking team. That's why. And you coming out and saying it, you have no self-awareness at all. You coming out and saying it just tells the entire NFL world, Dan, tells the entire NFL world that, hey, I'm the problem. And there's a track record. Right. This is the second time you did it. Like, how dense and dumb do you have to be to make that mistake?
I don't know. And that's a question, thankfully, that we don't have to ask ourselves anymore, though. It's not that thankful, guys, because that's 2021 draft. This should be the maturing year of that draft pick for the Giants. It shouldn't just be Shane did a great job, and he did, to get anything for that asset. It's a dead asset now. We realize that. He'll be out of the NFL or traded for a late round pick swap. That still doesn't, and that's great by Joe Schoen. You got ahead of it. You realize this could get even worse, and that's fine. But it still doesn't make it a win for the Giants. That's the part that I struggle with the most, Nick, because Dave effed us so bad that we should have an appreciating asset right now. We should have Christian Darrisaw on the roster playing right tackle and being fine at offensive tackle in both spots. And it would be only year 3 for Darrisaw. He'd be like in his early 20s for us. And then we have years, decades of this type of player, or anything that works. Get me a guard, get me an interior defensive line, anything that produces for value for the roster. But that's the problem. Like, you look past and everyone say, don't talk about that. Don't bring up Toney again. Why? It impacts the team now. Dave's mistake impacts the team now. That's the fact of the matter. These are the guys you need. You have to hit on your draft picks. You have to have them on the roster beyond 1 year. If you don't win in the NFL. It's a freaking most obvious thing.
You don't look at the entire situation of what Shane did in its totality, because Shane had nothing to do with the Kadarius Toney selection. You can look and say it was a good move by Shane to get what he could for something that he knew was going to be an absolute disaster. That doesn't mean the selection of Kadarius Toney worked out. I give Shane a lot of credit for getting rid of Kadarius Toney. That was an excellent move. And you know what? Good for the Kansas City Chiefs, because Kadarius Toney, to his credit, helped them win a Super Bowl. Did help him win a Super Bowl. But I think we can all see that this guy, he's not easy to work with. Okay, I think that's probably the best way to phrase it. He's not an easy person to work with, and I would be surprised if he's in the league for the next couple of years, especially if he keeps acting like this. He needs to take a nice long look in the mirror and see what the problem is.
And while you might want to get an alpha wide receiver 1, if you're using the 20th overall pick on, capital on a player like that, you might not get one like a player like Toney, but you might get one at 6 overall, Nick. And so let's talk about a couple players now. And again, Nick and I haven't, this is actually, it's January still. There's no chance we're going to have film done in January for some of these guys. And I'm going to have just basic knowledge of these guys because I started watching both. But we can use the big board from Daniel Jeremiah, because I believe he's locked in as one of the best analysts in the NFL draft game. I respect his work a lot, Nick. And the fact of the matter is he's paid by the NFL to do this work all year round. So he has, watched a shit ton of tape, Nick, on these players. And his first big board came out today, Nick. And there are two players of the wide receiver position ranked inside his top 7 overall at number 3 and at number 7, Nick. Obviously, there's 3, I should say. Marvin Harrison Jr., who I say without, that goes without saying. The Giants have literally, in my opinion, a 0.0% chance of getting him without trading up. And I stand by that 0% chance he falls to 6. I know some people have been like, what about this and this and this? No shot in hell. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be on the board at 6 overall. You can mark that down. And if I'm wrong about that, I'll give you something. You figure out what you want. It doesn't matter because it's not happening.
What's going on, Big Blue Banter listeners? I'm excited for the football season for several reasons. And one of those reasons is Prize Picks, which is North America's largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform. And it's so simple to use. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including professionals, sharks, and people who are going to exploit you, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you just watch the winnings roll in. It's very simple to play and gives you a little extra skin. I've set my picks in less than 60 seconds. There are so many stats to choose from, and the withdrawals of funds are easy and quick. Dan and I will be adding a segment to our show before every game where we pick our favorite stats, more or less, yards or touchdowns, what have you, and we'll be discussing why from a scheme, matchup, and game theory perspective. I love their promotions and how easy their interface is to operate at Prize Picks. I may select more on tackles for a loss from Bobby Okereke or Kayvon Thibodeau next game. They also do other sports as well. It's a really cool experience. Please join Dan and I in the fun of Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/banter and use code BANTER for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/banter and use code BANTER for a first deposit match up to $100. You will not regret it. Oh, my friends, you know what time it is. You're hungry, you're starving, and you desperately need pizza. You should get the best pizza on the market, and that is, of course, Little Caesars. Make Little Caesars the official pizza sponsor of the NFL part of your game day. Order online during the Pizza pregame all day on NFL game days and even on Pro Bowl Sunday, and get ready for some football fun and cheesy, delicious pizza. Choose your favorite Little Caesars pizza or pick the toppings you crave. Either way, you win. And speaking of winning, everyone scores with convenient delivery or our in-store pizza portal pickup. So grab some friends and enjoy a few slices during the game.
But there are 2 players out after Marvin Harrison Jr. inside Daniel Jeremiah's top 7 overall prospects that has to be considered A, blue chip. B, let's talk about if we think those guys can be wide receiver 1s for the Giants, both now and in the future. And I want to start with the first one, Nick, and give you Jeremiah's scouting report of him, since again we haven't had too much time, but it's not the same player that I think is number 2 wide receiver for some people in this class. It's actually Rome Odunze, I think is how you pronounce it, the Washington wide receiver. And, Odunze is a player who's 6'4". Some people have told me, Nick, that he's actually going to, and I don't know if this is true, but some people think he has 4.4 flat speed. If he's 6'4" and 4.4 flat speed, he will 100% be a top 5 or top 10 draft pick in the NFL. Those players are rare and they don't come around often. And if they have good film to go with it, which this kid obviously does, that means it'll be the case. I'm curious to see that. I think he'll be more of a 4.5 athlete from what
I don't know if he's actually 6'4", though.
He may not be 6'4" too. This is height lying season. We had what's his name? Xavier Leggett from South Carolina was supposed to be a 6'3" receiver, and he was
that
6'1".
one shocked me. That one shocked me. I thought Xavier Leggett would have been
so
a good 6'4". You know what it is? It's the short pants and the crop top. The short pants and the crop top looks like he has no. It looks like the shirt is just significantly smaller than it actually is, and you see his abs. And you're like, "Oh, this dude is long," and he does seem to have long arms. I didn't see how long his arms were.
Right,
he does seem long out there, though. Watching South Carolina, watching him run around, and then I saw he was like 6 foot, and I was like, "Dude, 3 inches."
No, 6'1". I think he got to 6'1", but yeah,
2 inches is important too. So
it's huge. Yeah, it's and so. maybe he's not going to be 6'4". Obviously, we're going to find out all this for real at the combine. That's when you can't lie anymore.
Yeah.
That's when it really comes down to it. But he's definitely a bigger receiver. And according to Darren John, who again has 3rd overall on his big board, that's big stuff because he has the obvious ones 1 and 2, at least the obvious ones for me, Caleb and Marvin. I think those are the clear-cut 2 best prospects in the class. Without a doubt, I don't care what anyone says. I've seen enough. But he has him as his next best prospect after those. That's it. And he says Odunze is a big, athletic wideout with exceptional hands. And I've seen that too when I've watched him. He plays outside or in the slot. That seems to be along the lines of what we said. Can you play both? He's refined and polished in everything he does on the field. He uses a variety of releases at the line of scrimmage. What did you say earlier, Nick? He uses his strength to lean into defenders before separating out of the break point. He thrives in traffic, processing the ability to pluck the football and absorb big shots over the middle of the field. He makes some incredible adjustments on poorly thrown footballs. He tracks naturally over his shoulder. That's something we always talk about, the underrated ability to track on the vertical plane. After the catch, he's tough to bring down, and he has some nifty make-miss ability. He plays with a ton of passion and energy. Overall, this is the crazy part of this comp, and this is why I know Jeremiah loves him. He compares him. Odunze says Odunze is a complete player, reminds him of Larry Fitzgerald when he was in college at Pitt. Wow.
Yeah, that is one high praise right there, Larry Fitzgerald. Now, I wasn't watching tape back then at Pitt for Larry Fitzgerald, but the little bit of film I've seen on Odunze, and that's just watching the tape on Saturday and stuff. I haven't really dove into Washington's all 22. Although I saw while cross checking a player a little bit of the tackles, because they have 2 really good tackles.
I know they do
at Washington. That's a really good offense, an interesting one. And
Right.
the trait that stuck out to me the most from the little bit I've seen is his ability to adjust at the catch point to make contested catches and his strength in those areas. I'm curious what he's going to run. I don't know if he'll run a 4.4. He could, definitely, but there are certainly, like, you watch like Malik Neighbors, they're being talked about around the same time. Malik Neighbors looks like he's moonwalking, but going like 20 miles per hour. It's crazy how smooth of an athlete Malik Neighbors is. I am so excited to watch LSU's offense, saving it for a little bit later on. And I'm getting a lot of these Senior Bowl guys done, but Neighbors and Jane, like they look very, very appetizing. If that,
and that's the beauty,
weird.
by the way, of like how this works out for the Giants this year and for us as our content. We get to double dip a lot because when we watch Penix, we get to watch Odunze. When we watch Jaden Daniels, we get to watch Neighbors and Mike Thomas and all those guys. So it's nice.
Exactly, but I always appreciated watching Odunze and how he was able to come down with those contested catches, and also just how effortlessly he just would pluck footballs out of the air. I don't know how many drops he had. I don't. He could have a lot, but just watching some of the tape, I can't remember the game now because I remember watching. I was like, dude, who is this guy? This guy's just the softest hands in the world. Also, the ability to make those contested catches, which is something that will translate. Am curious though to see what that speed is. It's going to be NFL ready, and he'll likely be a top 15 pick. He could be one of those answers for the Giants.
He could be an answer. And as far as Odunze goes, I haven't seen a lot of tape, but from what I have seen, you're kind of spot on with what stands out to me. It's that ability at the catch point. And I think part of it is also some of the stuff that Jeremiah mentioned and that we've talked about in the past, which is like kind of the hand fighting down the field, the body positioning and body control. Because I do feel like a lot of the passes that are attempted for him, Nick, he finds a way to position his body to get it to a point where he can make the catch. And that's, him at the catch point. But a lot of the times to me, he does get behind the coverage, does a good job to stack, but there's other times where he is not really NFL. He's definitely not NFL open, or he's definitely not college open, and he's borderline NFL open. But his ability to locate the football, like Dan Jeremiah says, to track it, and then like the soft hands and the ability to come down with it are all top notch. Now, that's when a prospect like that for me, Nick, that's when I start to get, and now that, all of what he is in his profile screams alpha wide receiver 1 based on the build we outlined to begin the show. My one where I start to get a little nervous is with the current outline and layout of the Giants. Is that a wide receiver 1 for a quarterback like Daniel Jones? Because for me, on the surface, Nick, the way I think about it is, can he come right in and win in the slot for Jones and give him those quick wins in the slot that Jones has proven he can hit? If he has it, right? He's proven it with Darren Waller at times, a little bit of work he's done with Waller. And he proved it all last season with Isaiah Hodgins at times, Richie James all the time last season in 2022. I can see Odunze coming in and being a big winner right there in the slot. Just big hands, big body, big target, understanding coverage, getting into spots quickly for Jones to get him the ball. The part that I have trouble with is what he's really great at, which is down the field and outside the numbers at the catch point, which we just broke down. I don't know. other people may have confidence in this, but I haven't seen Jones get the football outside the numbers. You broke it down in the last podcast, but during the 2022 season from the pocket, Jones had 13 total completions outside the numbers over a 17-game sample size. And he only attempted 33 of those passes. So just twice a game did he attempt a ball that was outside the numbers and 10 plus yards down the field. That's the area of the field Odunze seems to dominate at. So where does that leave us, at least for 2024? It doesn't leave me with a lot of confidence. Now, some people can say, oh, it's the O-line's fault, this and that, for reasons why it didn't happen in 2022 or in 2023 with Daniel Jones, or in 2021 or in 2020. It happened a little bit in 2019 with those half-field high-low reads from Pat Shurmur. But when it happened in 2019, it happened a lot from the slot, from the slot verts they ran with Ingram or with Tate. And that was both 2019 and 2020 when you mix in Ingram, who had a little bit more success there in 2020 with those slot verts. But as far as what Duns does well and what I've seen him do the best on tape, his calling card, I don't think it fits Daniel Jones as a quarterback. It fits Matt Stafford. It fits the quarterbacks with much bigger arms and much more willingness to throw a football if the wide receiver isn't quote unquote open. And that's something Daniel Jones has always struggled to do, in my opinion. His biggest flaw is not just his processing pre and post snap. Those are his two biggest flaws. It's his anticipatory throwing and his willingness to throw when a receiver is not quote unquote open yet, but can get open. He likes to wait for that receiver to be open to throw the football. And so maybe that can change in year 6 and he can rewire his brain, I guess, with the right coaching. It's possible. Anything's possible in life. It seems unlikely, though, to me, Nick. It seems very unlikely. So to me, if you go Odunze, it's more of a future pick.
Yeah, I know you would agree with that, too, that the Giants should not be selecting a wide receiver based on Daniel Jones being their quarterback in 2024. Odunze can be a good wide receiver.
You mean based on Daniel Jones? Oh, I see what you're saying. But I think the way I would term that, because it's a little confusing, and I don't want you to get misinterpreted here, would be based on Jones being the quarterback of the future. I know what you're saying, the way you said it, but what you're saying is don't make the pick with Jones in mind for 2024. Make it if you believe Jones is the future quarterback.
No, I'm saying that they shouldn't be going into the draft being like, well, Daniel Jones is our quarterback. Who fits in best with him? Daniel Jones should have absolutely nothing to do with this equation.
Okay.
You should look at it
and be like, with that.
Yeah, I know you do. Malik Neighbors and Odunze, who is the best wide receiver? Who is the better wide receiver, independent of who fits Daniel Jones's skill set more? Because Daniel Jones, I mean, this guy has had a long leash, longer leash than most NFL quarterbacks have had through several different.
One of the longest leashes I've ever seen for a quarterback.
Exactly.
No, I should say for a quarterback with his production, raw stats, his production, advanced stats, and his tape. Yeah. You look at all those three things, and it's a long leash.
But the conversation has to be, and we're going to get into this during the draft season, big time, Odunze or Malik Neighbors, and that's independent of Jones. Daniel Jones. Now, Odunze might fit Daniel Jones better, but is Odunze a better overall wide receiver than Malik Neighbors? And I don't know, just off the cuff, what I've seen from the little bit that I have watched. So this is somewhat of an uneducated, perfunctory take. I believe that Malik Neighbors is so freaking fun.
I love Neighbors too.
He is and I like Odunze, I really do. But Malik Neighbors reminds me, and it's the LSU thing. I don't even. That's not. Ooh. He has Odell Beckham Jr. to him. You want to throw him a slant, he's gone, man. That acceleration, that explosiveness, that burst, bro. And he has those abilities to win downfield. He's not like a Quentin Johnston type.
And he has the Brown ability, which to me is the comebacks. The comebacks are the ones where you can sell the vert and then break down and drop into a comeback, then make that catch and then explode after the catch. You're almost unstoppable at that point, in my opinion, as a wide receiver. And that's what Brown was for a while, because you have to respect his ability to win vertical. But also, if you do, he's going to just break down and catch that comeback and then break out of that. And it's crazy.
It is crazy, man.
I like him a lot.
It's very fun to watch. He's somebody who can defy safety angles. Like, I like those types of wide receivers if they have the complete package. I haven't watched enough film yet to know what his complete package is. Pause. But I will say this. From what I have seen, I think I'm going to like him a lot. But
yeah, you want to watch film on that package, don't you? On that complete package. Hello. But 40 minutes in, can somebody mark that down? Do we have a producer? No, we don't. 40 minutes in, well, we do. It's Nick. But 40 minutes in, Nick's first big word of the day, perfunctory. This guy is the biggest vocabulary in the history of the world. Well, that brings me back to my next point, Nick, which is a good point, because I agree with you that you can't, if and it's all about the search for a wide receiver alpha one for the Giants, right? They really haven't had one since Odell Beckham Jr. It's been a long time at this point since the Giants had an alpha. And even with Beckham in his final year, you could see the impact it had on someone like Saquon Barkley, for example, having that defense tilt their coverage to a wide receiver. What does it do for your run game? But would be this. We agree that you don't draft this wide receiver one based on how he fits Daniel Jones' skill set. But Nick, because we know they're gonna do this, do you have in mind when you're making the decision, Neighbors or Dunze, for example, how he fits Brian Daboll's system and and how he fits Joe Shane's what he wants out of a wide receiver, right? Yeah, it has to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I just don't know yet because I've had cursory viewing of both of these guys, which one would be that player. But a guy like Neighbors, I think that's a type of dude from what I have seen that can fit into really any system because he's the slant and go type of guy. He's the, oh, I made the catch and now you can't catch me. Bye-bye type of wide receiver.
By the way, the Giants leveraged that whole idea into a 11-win season and almost, if it wasn't for some just brutal drops at horrible times, playoff win back in 2016. That's all their offense was. Give Odell a slant and see if he can go. They even have like a vertical pass game that year. So there is value to those type of players. Those are true alphas that do tilt. But let me give a quick recap of Daniel Jeremiah, since we haven't done the tape yet. Excuse me, Daniel Jeremiah's blurb on Malik Neighbors, who again, he has ranked as his 7th best overall prospect in this class. He says Neighbors is a dynamic receiver with outstanding competitiveness, which I, by the way, loved about his tape, that he was competitive. I know the Giants will love that. And production. He explodes off the line in his release, is something Nick referenced as a key for any alpha receiver earlier. He creates intermediate separation, something I mentioned earlier. I love the separation he creates intermediate. That, to me, was Antonio Brown's calling card. He sets up defenders before snapping off his route. He isn't afraid to work the middle of the field, has strong hands to finish through contact. When working back to the quarterback, he prefers to let the ball travel into his body, but the drops are limited. That I don't love about his game. He can scoop low throws off his shoes and easily adjust the balls on his back hip. He does a lot of his damage on slot fades. That's one of the only vertical area elements in the game the Giants ever found consistency with Daniel Jones. So I know I'm not thinking Daniel Jones long-term, but it's still worth considering. Where he uses his speed to win early and he tracks the ball with ease. After the catch, he explodes through tackles. This is what we were talking about. Nasty stiff arm. He says, and remember earlier he compared Dunze to Fitzgerald. He says overall Neighbors is an electric playmaker who reminds me of DJ Moore with the ball in his hands.
DJ Moore. Okay. I can
we would take that.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely take that at this point. There was a play against Texas A&M. I think it was like towards the end of the season where Neighbors caught like a simple drag route, and then some poor cornerback was like, "Oh, let me go get it. Oh, no, never mind," and he just like ran it upfield. And I saw Malik Neighbors multiple times, and I don't know if he stepped out of bounds. Didn't seem like he did, but I saw him like full stride acceleration, kind of like stop and slow up, like he was looking back, like, oh, did they call the play dead? What's happening? And then everybody else on the defense was still chasing him, and they couldn't catch up. I don't know if it's not like Tyreek Hill speed, like that's not like what I see with it. It's just like an overall explosiveness.
It's the acceleration, I think, is the word you're looking for, is how I would term it.
Long legs. I don't think this guy's that big, is he? Like I think I had it up here. I think he was like 6'1", maybe 6 foot. Like he's not like super tall, like a Marvin Harrison's what, like 6'3", I think.
Yep. Oh, no, he might be 6'4", I think, Harrison. We'll obviously see at the combine, but
big guy. But yeah, so I don't know. It's just this overall smooth acceleration and burst that Neighbors has, man. And maybe it's just looking at the LSU Tigers uniform and being like, is that Odell? No, it's not that. I can assure you. Because I wasn't even somebody who during the 2014 draft, I didn't watch a ton of Odell Beckham tape. Like I knew who he was. I know you did. Yeah. My guys during that draft that I absolutely loved and I was pounding the table for was Zach Martin and Aaron Donald. I think we've had this conversation.
Yeah.
I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Ron Schneier, but I know that would be, I was pounding the table for both of those guys.
Zach Martin's a Hall of Fame. He's going to be a Hall of Famer at least.
Yeah. Aaron Donald too, man. Just like absolute. And then Odell worked out as well. It's just some other things. It worked out in the sense that it was a draft hit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I say that like he's a good football player.
Yes,
he's not a bust, but
no, he's not going to be a Hall of Famer though, like the other two.
No, I don't think so.
Probably not, at least. But when it came to that, Odell was actually my wide receiver 1 in that class over Watkins. And the reasons are, Nick, that I'm a sucker for these types of prospects. I loved, and it's just what you said. It's kind of when you watch them, it's almost like I don't know how much tape you need on these types of guys to see the one trait that you're discussing, which is that post-catch burst and acceleration and the impact that it makes, man. I watched a ton of LSU on broadcast this year because I got in a real steady habit of betting them toward the end of the year.
You?
Florida game, the one they were losing and came back. That was one of my greatest bets ever. I think it was like Mississippi State or one of those like coaches that just got fired his first game coaching. And I hate betting against those situations, Nick, because they're always playing hard for that new interim. But I did, and it worked anyway. They came back. But, watching a lot of that offense, he was the guy who always stood out to me. Obviously, Jaden Daniels stood out to me. I mean, this dude had like 56, 20 plus plays on his own, Daniels, with his legs and arm. But Neighbors, man, post catch, there were some explosive runs after the catch from him that I was just like, that's the difference. Like, that's what I see translating at the NFL level. Because I know when you put that on an NFL field, that isn't the game. The speed of the game at the NFL level doesn't catch up to him. Like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, always my favorite example, a guy who was good at the college level, but just a tick slow for the NFL level. Neighbors, I think, is not a tick slow for the NFL level. And a guy like Odunze, I want to see how he runs, but a guy like him scares me if he gets put in the wrong quarterback situation for the team that's going to just not get him the ball in all of those spots when he's not quote unquote open, obviously on film, but he's open because he'll make the play at the catch point. And so that's just something I want to consider as we move forward. But again, you can't base it on the current quarterback situation for the Giants because it seems to us highly unlikely it's going to be their future. But we shouldn't shake it off like that, Nick. There's a chance.
No, I'm saying I agree. Like the Giants might do that. That would be a bad move, but we would be like, oh, we have a fun podcast to record now, baby.
Not even fun anymore, though. Like, it's not fun anymore to record to
People
talk
love
about
Dan
that
rants,
situation.
bro.
Yeah, and it is what it is. Like that, I'm not even going to rant about it if it happens. This year, they may not, in my opinion, have no other option, which, again, goes back to my whole thing about, again, I'm struggling to find long-term value in those wins over the Commanders and Patriots this year. I'm struggling hard. I won't go back into it, and you can believe what you want on it, and I'm fine with it. Again, I don't think they should have tanked, but again, I wish the Patriots kind of made that field goal, and I wish the Redskins didn't turn the ball over 6 times, and Mac Jones didn't dump them like 10 points. Because quite honestly, looking at it now, I would much rather have the pick, and it's not even close. And I don't think there was any carryover value. And if you want to say, oh, would have got Daboll fired, that's fine. But like in the end, do I care about that or getting the quarterback? I care about getting the quarterback more than anything else. And quite honestly, I care about not having trade assets up, even if they're gonna. But whatever, that's spilled milk. But point being, Nick, that if the Giants make that decision long-term that Jones is their guy, that may be the case. Like, we don't know, Nick. There's a chance that Jones comes back this year. It's their only option really at quarterback. And he grinds out another season similar to 2022. And with John Mara, that could be good enough to continue just investing in that path. Because for him, I really do believe that he views like those 9-win seasons as gold to him because of how bad it's been all the other years in the last 10. I mean, he really loved that 2022 season. They got a win over Minnesota. They scored a lot of points in that game. Don't factor in how bad the Minnesota defense was if you don't want to, but I think he has the upside of ceiling Jones of taking the Giants to another 9-win season next year. And so if he does that, it's still a ceiling more so for me. But if he does that, they might just move forward with him at that point,
I don't think Daniel Jones gets another contract with the New York Giants.
No, not another contract, but to continue forward with this contract is what I mean. Instead of cutting him after 2024. You know what I'm saying? Like to go into 2025
I do.
with a $53 million cap hit. By that point, it'll be an even bigger cap hit because they're going to restructure a bunch if they decide to go forward, Jones. So at that point, it'll probably be a 2025 cap hit of like $58-60 million type of thing for Jones.
Dan, I want to say one thing.
Yeah.
I don't know what you did with your hair today, but for the YouTube audience, this might be the best I've ever seen your hair.
Nice.
Yeah. I don't exactly know why. I can't even really accurately explain it. It just looks like it's coiffed. It's coiffed.
You know what I'm trying to do? Maybe I did a little combing. I don't even think I did, though. I think I just woke up like this. I'm trying to grow out a beard for the first time in my life, Nick. So I'd rather talk to you about this off pod because it's a little embarrassing, or just weird, I guess, would be the way to determine it, or just, I don't know. I'm not like this type of, but I am curious how you got that beard and what I can do to improve mine. I feel like it's coming in decent, but there are issues I have. There's issues when it comes out over here. I don't like when it comes like out on the sides. I don't know what to do with that other than comb it down. So we'll talk, but we're on appearances right now, so we're going to talk about that in the hair. But let's get back into the podcast here, Nick, and wrap this thing up. So look, those are the two receivers that we think could be potential alpha ones. Giants might be in the mix for. A guy who DJ has, we're going to talk about real briefly here, as his 15th best prospect overall, which I guess you could consider could be an alpha wide receiver one, is Brian Thomas, the other LSU receiver, which brings me to a whole other larger discussion we'll have when we talk Jaden Daniels, which is what impact does it, that system in LSU and having two elite wide receiver prospects, what kind of impact does that make on the quarterback? And do we knock a guy because of that?
Yeah, it's not like we have any test cases from that in recent memory, right?
Right, exactly. Good point. With Joe Burrow, you mean?
Yeah, Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase.
Right. That was insane, that wide receiver core. But we won't get too much into Thomas today. For now, we're focusing on those two. But I want to do, before we sign out here, Nick, and kind of wrap up and put a bow on this wide receiver one conversation, I want to just take a look at other teams, what they did to try to get a wide receiver one and what kind of impact it made. So I have them kind of going by division, Nick, and I'm going to start with the AFC East here. So the Bills, perfect example you mentioned earlier. Stephon Diggs was already in some people's mind an established alpha wide receiver one with the Vikings, but had competition there with Adam Thielen. I still believe he was one. He gets to the Bills and he becomes one. If he wasn't one already, he is one that's dictating coverage, that's changing the entire fortune of the pass game. So I would say, and we'll just go rapid fire through these, and you could say if it worked or it didn't work, and then we'll kind of recap them, and I'll total it up. So would you say that decision worked?
Absolutely.
Okay. Dolphins, Tyreek Hill, already established wide receiver one. Absolutely. Would you say that one worked? That one's absolutely. You can see it on the film. Jets, Garrett Wilson, they got him with a top 10 pick. Where are we at with that one?
Absolutely.
So this one, okay, let me try to reframe the conversation, because obviously these worked out as far as like, did the picks work out? And we already knew the first two. But I'm saying, did it change the fortunes of the offense? I think in the first two cases it did. What about in the Jets case?
Okay, so under that description, no,
and I'll tell you why real quick, why that's my description. My description is that, Nick, and I'll let you go after this, is because I don't know for sure that the Giants are going to be able to maximize the alpha wide receiver one in 24 with a current quarterback and O-line situation. Okay, go. Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. But man, it's no fault on the players, so we have to make that like entirely clear. Yes. I still think I don't want to say full no though, because Garrett Wilson, even though the team, if you're asking me, did it result in wins and productivity for a competing playoff team, then no. But if you're resulting in, like, when you watch the game and the defense is significantly dictated, then yes. So it really depends on that, which is kind of digging into the meat here. But I think that's an important delineation.
My only issue with that, and this is interesting because it brings up such a larger conversation that we would have to get, it's going to take time, is part of why when you watch them on tape, Garrett Wilson does dictate coverage so much because of the quarterback play. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. When you have the guys like Mahomes and Burrow, you cannot really afford to allocate as many assets and dictate your coverage to one receiver, because those quarterbacks will just chew that type of coverage up because they're too good. But when you have a Zach Wilson or whatever at quarterback, or Simeon and whoever they put, Mike White, you can kind of afford to allocate more resource, I think, to defending a wide receiver when you know this quarterback is not going to process the field well anyway after the snap.
He's just going to catch the snap and then throw it. But the Jets took measures to have Aaron Rodgers, right? Like they addressed that issue, and then it was an unfortunate tearing of the Achilles 4 plays, the most Jet thing ever, 4 plays into the season for that to happen. So it's not like the Jets as an organization neglected to address it, right? They neglected to have a backup plan, and they stuck to their guns there. And that was a big issue, but they didn't neglect to address it. If that's the way we're looking at it, like, hey, we're taking the receiver, but you don't really have the other option, because they made sure they had the other option. And if that has to be grouped into this conversation as well, then I would still say yes, because I think Garrett Wilson would have been a hit and still was a hit, depending on how we're framing this discussion.
That's fair. And I think they're happy to have that asset on the roster. And by the way, it reminded me of a meme I saw from this weekend. Did you see the play from the Chiefs-Ravens game where Mahomes got bent backwards and then somehow got out of that? I saw a meme that was like, if Mahomes was on the Jets and this was on the Jets, Mahomes would be paralyzed from the waist down after this play.
It's so true, though. It's so true.
It's so
I
true. It's so
Yeah,
sad.
a
The
lot of
Jets
New
are
York teams are like that. The Mets are like that. The Knicks are like this.
it's
Well, Knicks are
crazy,
good.
bro.
Knicks are good now, at least, but like just historically, they're just snake bitten franchises.
It's so true. It's crazy how bad the New York franchises have been in a market that has owners willing to pay and fans willing to pay and play and come and support and everything like that. It's just wild to me.
And it's also, and this is like a little side tangent, but it's also like big things happen, like measures and steps are taken by these specific franchises that are supposed to change the fortunes
I
of
know.
all of these franchises, and then they never work out. Like Steve Cohen buying the Mets and then, upgrading the payroll didn't work out, traded a bunch of the pitchers, right? You look at
Yeah.
the Knicks, like we're bringing in Phil Jackson. We're like, Phil Jackson, the triangle, Carmelo Anthony's coming. Didn't work. It was an absolute disaster. It's like
Yeah.
all of them, like they give you like, it's like, here, oh, it's gonna work, buddy, it's gonna work, and then they just rip it away, man. It's so
Yep.
freaking frustrating.
It is, especially being a Knicks fan. Bengals, Jamar Chase, that one worked, though I think
Yeah.
that one has a caveat because they threw 1,000 balls together before their final college season and played all together. Like the rapport there between Burrow and Chase has to be factored in, but I'll give it a work. Browns, you mentioned Cooper, maybe he's not a true. Ravens,
So
I
this
put
is
them
only we're doing true here. Okay, then no.
true alpha ones. What we would
Yeah,
deem
no.
to be true alpha ones. So
If he
no
played
Cooper.
in
I
if
don't.
he played in Cleveland every game,
Yeah.
maybe, because it does seem like he just balls
Yeah, I know
out
his
when
home.
he's
It's so
home.
weird.
Yeah,
His
that is a
home
weird
thing,
thing.
his home road splits for fantasy. Ravens, I didn't think OBJ at this point or Flowers qualified as a true alpha.
No.
Pickens, I didn't consider for Steelers yet. Pittman, I didn't consider for Colts. Nico Collins or Tank Dell, I don't
Pittman's
consider.
interesting. Pittman's
Okay,
interesting. I don't think I would say he's the alpha, but he's a one. Like if he's our wide
true.
receiver one, he's better than any wide receiver one that we've had since Odell Beckham.
Okay,
So
that's a fair way
that's
to
not
look at
like
that.
the alpha that I think this conversation is about, but I still I think that's a good like starting point. And if you were to tell me next year he's an alpha, similar to like what Nico Collins, we're about to talk about him,
Mhm.
what Nico Collins did for the Texans this year. If you were to say Michael Pittman would have that season with Anthony Richardson, if Anthony Richardson takes a step in his development from what we saw of him throwing when he was at Florida, I would not be shocked because I think the talent is there for Michael Pittman Jr. to take that
I
step.
agree, but for me, like part of what you said was if Richardson takes that step, like for me with Nico Collins, that's like the best example. To
Yeah.
me, that's not a true alpha wide receiver one. And I
Okay.
think he was not one before CJ Stroud get there, and then CJ Stroud gets there and he's torching defenses on a weekly basis. To me, that's CJ Stroud and offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick and everything coming together with the offense more than anything else. It's Stroud's anticipatory throwing, it's Stroud's processing of the field, it's Stroud's arm talent, more so than Nico dictating
Okay.
coverage. And
Yeah.
yeah,
See
um,
where that conversation gets a little
sure.
just difficult
Yeah,
is how much of it is Nico Collins growing into himself as a player, coinciding with the
true.
arrival of CJ Stroud and Bobby Slow, because he's like
Which I
24
think is
years
a
old.
big factor. But to me, no matter what the
Okay.
situation is, Nico is not a true alpha wide receiver one.
I'm not saying that he is either.
Yeah,
I tend to agree with you, but I think he definitely can be. So it really depends on what is a true, like who is the last true alpha
true.
wide receiver one? I think that's a way, like who is the last
Yeah.
true alpha wide
And
receiver
what do we
one?
consider to be? Like, for example, like Calvin Ridley, the Jags brought him in to be their wide receiver one,
Yeah.
and he wasn't really that this year. And it didn't
No.
really dictate coverage and it didn't change their passing game in the way people expect. The same thing with Nook. He's later in his career, but he didn't change that Titans passing game the way they hoped and expected him to based on what they had with AJ Brown. So it's like, is he really an alpha wide receiver? Now, part of that is the factor of they went away from Tannehill early. Tannehill was injured, and Tannehill to me is really taking a step back in his post-snap
Of course.
processing.
Well,
But
Hopkins
yeah,
to
go ahead.
Tennessee, that was never going to be a alpha wide
That's
receiver
what
one.
they
Maybe a,
wanted
I
out
don't,
of that, though.
I think they wanted him to be
Yeah,
a one,
they
an
wanted to. I
alpha.
thought they wanted him to do what AJ Brown was for their offense.
Like when Hopkins went from the Texans to Arizona, that is a good example of he went from one
Sure,
team to another team and he remained like an alpha wide receiver one for a young Kyler Murray. Like that was a really good win for the Arizona Cardinals.
true.
But at this point, he's like 32 years. He's older, I think,
Yeah,
right? Like
he's
I think he's
older.
like 31, 32 years old. I think they just wanted, like, yeah, you would want him to be the alpha, but I think they would have been happy with him just being a nice number one wide receiver, just he's the first option we're going to go to, but I don't think they had delusions that he would be like Jamar Chase or
Fair.
something.
Raiders tried it with Devontae Adams. Year one with Derek Carr. Year two, they tried to get Garoppolo in there. I would consider that one to be a bust for their franchise. They traded a valuable pick and they allocated a lot of cap space to a receiver who we believe would probably be still great if he was able to like go to the Jets or something with Aaron Rodgers again. with that rapport they have, but I don't think he tilted that franchise. So to me, that would be one example that wouldn't be in the wouldn't work pile. Seahawks drafted DK Metcalf, great location of him in the second round of the draft. I think to an extent he tilts coverage and he changes things there, but I don't know where that one would be for me. Where are you at on that one?
I give it to
Okay.
him. Again, the definition of what we're going on right now, it's pretty loose.
It
But
is.
I look at DK Metcalf. If I'm a defensive coordinator, I'm like, shit, I gotta go this one. But it also depends on what else is around him. So I think maybe I should make it a little less broad, like what the alpha is. And then if that's the case, then obviously Pittman, Nico Collins, and maybe not even DK Metcalf. I think maybe the best thing that we could do right now to set that standard is who is the last alpha wide receiver one in the NFL.
Yeah, well, maybe like Mike Evans, because you
That's
could
where
see
I
the
that's
impact
what I was
Mike Evans
thinking.
had with Baker this year.
Oh, it's crazy.
Right. But
So
then
I
you
was
have like a guy who I loves tape. This is the problem I have with this stuff, Nick, of what kind of impact can these guys make, right? Because if you're going to use a 6 overall pick, that's heavy capital. How about a guy who I think has phenomenal tape, but he hasn't helped their passing game at all, really. He has when he gets opportunity, but he hasn't tilted or shifted. Drake London. Because Drake London on tape is unreal. And then you watch him and the quarterbacks completely held him back. And there's no way out for a player like that when you have quarterback play that bad. And they've had good old line too. They were 7th best pass blocking team this year.
Well, that's one reason why this exercise is more just it's not as practical and it's more just kind of fun because the environment that Drake London is in is much different than the environment that another player is in. He had Arthur Smith calling plays for him with Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke as his quarterback. That's a shit situation to find yourself in as a wide receiver.
It's not good, though. Some would argue that Arthur Smith was able to generate passing game in his past coaching stint with the Titans, and the bigger issue was just that you have Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke at quarterback. I would argue it's both, but I would argue my heavy lean is on the quarterback because you know where I stand on football. I believe the quarterback makes offensive line play at times. The quarterback processes defenses. To me, it's a lot more obvious and less controversial than a lot of people make it. To me, it's can this quarterback process this shit pre-snap, post-snap, see the field well, throw with anticipation, then everything looks better. Like if Drake London had that right now, I feel like, and had a quarterback with arm talent too, because you need that also. I feel like things would look a lot better for him. And it doesn't really matter about the O-line or the play caller as much when that quarterback is doing what he's doing. But, that's an example. And then you have like Olave, another example of a guy who I feel like has been held back by quarterback play and could be a true alpha one, but we don't know because of the quarterback. Even someone like Justin Jefferson, to me, Nick, it's like Jefferson has made Cousins more, in my opinion, than Cousins has made Jefferson. And that's a good, sign, but that's also the best receiver in football. So it's like, can the Giants expect to get that?
Yeah, I don't know if you can expect to get that. And also you watch if we're looking at this, and again, we're not doing this to just bash Daniel Jones, but we have to look at this through the lens of the New York Giants. Kirk Cousins is a much more aggressive thrower than Daniel Jones. Kirk Cousins is much more willing to challenge tight windows than Daniel Jones.
He sees the field a lot better than Jones.
He sees
really
the
as simple as that.
So much better than Daniel Jones. So from that standpoint, it's like if you were to add Malik Neighbors and go forward with Daniel Jones as your quarterback, I don't believe Daniel Jones is just going to be slinging it around the yard a la Kirk Cousins with Justin Jefferson. It's just not going to be that way, dude.
And that's the whole thing. It's like, this is where the big debate goes. And I think even if you're a big staunch Jones supporter, you should ask yourselves like this one question. Do you think that he sees the field well? And if you kind of don't, and it's hard for me to imagine you would think he sees the field well, you're either in one or two buckets past. So I think we can even get past that first question and say, I think even you, the biggest supporter, would say he doesn't see the field well post-snap, really at all. Now, the question would be, in your mind, will that change when there's pass protection? Will you start to be able to better post-snap? And that's what it comes down to, because then maybe he can start slinging the ball out there, Nick, and throwing with anticipation. Because I think for a thrower like Jones, in my opinion, Nick, I don't think he has great arm talent. I think it's adequate arm talent. So if you don't have that great velocity, you really win by anticipation. That's how Phillip Rivers won. That's how the non-velocity quarterbacks end up winning. So if Jones could ever really start to get the ball out fast and get it into spots where the receivers can run under it, or the receivers can make plays on it in contested catch situations, or the receivers catch it and then have some post-catch space to run with, he'd be an amazing quarterback. But I guess the debate for us versus that, or for me versus them, and I know you're on this side, so I guess we can say us versus them, is how much of that is improved by improving the offensive line? Because to me, a lot of what these spots would be where Jones could really improve at, like getting the ball out, it's getting the ball out in under 2 seconds. And at that stage of it, like, sure, if you have like the Miami Dolphins game level offensive line breakdowns, you don't even have the 2 seconds, right? You have
Yeah.
less than 2. But when you don't have those breakdowns, it's got to click really fast in your head, man. And you can't be looking at the pass rush or looking for the B gap if it's open to run. You have to be just processing all this shit in your head fast and getting the ball out into space quick with anticipation and throwing it to a spot, not waiting for the receiver to be open. And so the biggest, I guess, issue I have with that is how much of that will or can improve. And I think that's the biggest question you got to ask yourselves as far as Jones goes when it comes to maximizing these receivers. If the Giants do go with the wide receiver one round, because I'll tell you this, Nick, the Giants have 3 picks. Where's the Seahawks pick? Where did that finish? I don't have it on receivers that are probably going to be available. 47. I thought 42 might be a little. They've won some games at the end, but let's say 47 to two picks in the 3 picks in the top 47. Based on the Jeremiah big board, and I'm sure we'll get to this point too as we study the class, there's going to be a lot of talented receivers available in round 2. And this may be the class where you get your DK Metcalf Alpha 1 in round 2 or your AJ Brown Alpha 1 in round 2. Both those guys were round 2 picks. And it's not uncommon to find alpha wide receivers in the top 50 on the back end of the top 50. Because then it becomes a point of, do you want to use that 6 over pick at wide receiver when you think there might be potential wide receiver 1 alpha at round 2, or instead get a Dallas Turner type who, some people love his tape. Haven't seen much yet, but some people love that tape, and you could put him on the defense with everything the Giants already have on their line with Kayvon and Dex, and you may be looking at the dominant front if it all hits right. If Kayvon develops more, we already know Dex is there. If this kid develops more, that took them to Super Bowls in the 2011 and 2007 season. I know 11 was a little different because their defense was bad regular season, but kind of got healthy and came alive in the playoffs. But like that's the last part of the conversation that intrigues me the most about, because I think some people are locked in, Nick, at 6 overall. The quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3. No one wants to trade down. Let's get the best player available, and that player is Roma Dunze, or that player is Malik Neighbors, and that's fine. And I'm intrigued by that as well. But I'm also then become intrigued by like the cost, the opportunity cost of passing on wide receiver, or let's say passing on going wide receiver and passing on an edge like Turner or one of these tackles. Or
it's going back to the 2022 draft. Obviously, we all supported the
it.
offensive tackle selection, but who was selected after Evan Neal?
Who was after Evan Neal in that?
It was Garrett Wilson.
Who was Garrett Wilson? Yeah. And who was selected before Kayvon Thibodeau, Sauce Gardner? That sucks, kind of. But I love Kayvon, but not at the level of Sauce Gardner. Where anywhere close.
The Jets, they have that over us right now. We got to accept it. Give them something, right? Not that we have that much right now.
Well, at least we have the 2 Super Bowls in 07 and 11. But yeah, it's an interesting conversation, Nick. How do the Giants get that alpha wide receiver 1? What value does it have for them short and long term? And something we're going to talk about a lot this draft season. We're going to get into profiles of Malik Neighbors and Romeo Duns. And we're going to talk about those 2 players and compare them. And who do we like? And we may have a strong opinion, or we may view them similar as prospects. We don't know right now. It's fun. We'll see. I know Daniel Jeremiah has them at 3 and 7, which is pretty close. But who knows where we'll come out in our big board. But I'm excited to talk about this. I'm excited to work through the rest of these big questions. Just for those who don't know, it's a 5-part series on the burning questions facing the Giants. This is part 2. Part 3, 4, and 5, we'll get into the offensive line, how to rebuild that, the running back position, where they go from there. And then what do they do at defense with all these inherited pieces, plus the new ones you're bringing in, and a new defensive system? We're probably going to move that for the last part or the first part, depending on when the Giants hire a defensive coordinator. So we want to get into the tape of that DC and stuff like that. Yeah, we want to look as we'll have more information for that. And for the O-line pod, I think you're going to like that one, because our plan for now is to really dig deep and do some research on how different NFL teams have built their offensive lines out, and look for anything we can learn from that, and then compare it to what the Giants are doing, how they've tried to build their O-line out, and how they can build it moving forward. So I'm really excited for the offensive line one, Nick. But all those are going to be fun. Excited to do them all. Senior Bowl week right now, so we'll probably cover that in some regard. Neither Nick or I were able to go down there, but I have some boots on the ground at CBS, so I have some inside info and sources from there. So we'll do that as well. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.